Can I, very prescient time, introduce and welcome back John Shipley, Lord John Shipley, who's going to speak to us and take questions on the whole devolution issue, which of course... Can we go that one, please? Thank you, John.
Okay, Ian, thank you. Indeed, you're right. How wise of you to organise this meeting the day after the announcement of the devolution deals for the North East and Tees Valley. Just to get our terminology right, if I say North East, I mean the North East Combined Authority. I do not mean the North East region. If I say Tees Valley, I mean Tees Valley, the 5 authorities that make up Tees Valley. And if I talk about the region, I mean the North East of England as a whole. Is that okay? Let me just take my jacket off. What I really want to do is to spend about 20 minutes doing 3 things. One is really to talk about the history of this for about a minute, the last 5 years. Secondly, to talk about what the devolution deals across the region actually amount to. And thirdly, and going to be most of it, relates to some of the issues and problems that I think we have to pay attention to and think very carefully about. I was intrigued by the headline in the Journal this morning, which said, "All friends in the North." Everybody was there in photographs, all friends in the North. And then down the article was a line saying, "Political rivalries cast aside for the day." I don't know whether this referred to Labour leaders meeting Tory Chancellor, or whether it actually meant the Labour leaders themselves. Anyway, if you look back at 5 years to 2010, we have a lot to be proud of as a party, because we have helped to drive the devolution debate, and then some significant outcomes in what has actually happened. As you know, our manifesto talks about devolution on demand. We have been a strongly devolutionist party, and of course the problem is always the same. It's what do you actually mean? What exactly are the powers? What will the consequent responsibilities be? And exactly where does all the money come from to do all the things that you want? We got through Parliament, the coalition government. The localism bill became an act in 2011. There was a growth and infrastructure bill that did a range of things which helped further drive the devolution of decision making. But the cities and local government devolution bill is a really big one. And that started its life in the House of Lords because the Queen's speech, the whole range of announcements by the government as to what they're going to do, but the House of Lords has to have some work to do. And so one of the 4 bills that came to the House was the Cities and Local Government Devolution Bill, and we got a week's notice that we were going to take it as second reading. And I led the team in the Lords on that, and we had about 6 or 7 of us working on the detail of the bill. We made a whole set of amendments to it. Some of those have been agreed by the government, others have not been agreed. One of the things not agreed this week in the Commons is the fact that we had struck out in the Lords the need for an elected mayor if there was going to be a very significant degree of devolution. You may have noticed that Cornwall, where we are effectively in control, or at least lead the council, there is no elected mayor. It's a single unitary council, of course, but it has a fair degree of devolved powers, but not as great as the powers that are about to come to Tees Valley and to the North East. There are 2 reasons why the devolution agenda has moved on apace. The first is that there is a widespread recognition across Westminster and Whitehall that if more efficient services which are joined up in across the public sector are to be delivered, then you have to devolve the responsibility for delivering them to the people who live in the relevant areas. So there is a commitment politically that it is the right thing to do, and that there will be better services as a consequence, because the prioritisation would have been done locally, and the commitment will have been delivered locally. But there is a second driver which is going to get more serious at the end of November, because on the 25th the Chancellor stands up and announces a whole range of spending cuts to all those parts of government which aren't protected. And protection is within the health service, it's in schools, it's in pensions, and it's in overseas aid. And with the commitment to 2% of GDP on defence, it's been practiced there as well. And so local government is going to take quite a hit, along with skills, further education, universities, and a range of other areas. And government believes that it's just essential to empower local authorities in particular to do more, because if they can do more, they can actually manage to save more money. And so there are those two drivers. Now, in the last 24 hours, we've seen the announcement of the devolution deals across the region. And they aren't quite the same, and I could really spend a lot of time talking about the detail, and I'm not actually going to do that, but I'll give you a broad brush. There's a lot of things which are similar in them, where money appears. Broadly speaking, the North East Combined Authority gets twice as much as Tees Valley, reflecting the population. However, there are things within Tees Valley and things within the North East which are slightly different. And I just suggest, Ian, I don't know, you circulated to me the papers, they are public papers from Tees Valley. Okay. But I think that if other people, it really is, I mean, if you're a councillor, it is essential that you read these documents for your combined authority area. It is absolutely essential that you're doing that, because there is so much there. Theoretically, there is no impact on individual councils in this. You just carry on doing the things that you are doing. The reality, I fear, may be slightly different, and I'll come back to this, to that in a moment. Look, the devolution deals, they are primarily about strategic planning, about employment and skills, and about transport, but they have other things as well. There are investment funds proudly announced worth £1.3 billion of new money, until you realise that it's over 30 years. And actually, in practice, given the state of government finances, in my view, this will prove to be recycled money, existing money. There's going to be some very important evolved transport responsibilities that enable transport, public transport, but also some private transport to be integrated better, powers over bus service franchising, introduction of smart cards, which hopefully will be introduced right across the north of England. In Tees Valley, there's talk about New Tees Crossing. There's talk about making Darlington Station HS2 ready. Well, since the HS2 track stopped just north of Leeds, I'm not entirely. I'm assuming this relates to the compatible rolling stock that the North East is going to have that will come through to Newcastle. I'm not too sure quite what that means, but certainly improvements at Darlington Station anyway. And then there's talk of electrification of the Northallerton to Teesport line as well. One of the advantages for the North East will be that integrating metro with rail, because Northern Rail and TransPennine franchising are being devolved out of Whitehall. All of these things, they just give you power to plan the integration of metro with rail a little bit better than now. So a lot on transport, just read it up. Post-16 training and skills policy, I welcome this, that there are still significant powers held in Whitehall. Of course, further education colleges, we have them now, and they have funding streams now. So there's a lot of work to assess exactly how this will operate in practice. Notice the Tees Valley Development Corporation being talked about. There's going to be a North East Land Board as well. So that basically, that is, there's a very good motion about brownfield sites on the agenda this afternoon. Well done to those who put that down. But it's about those land boards and that development corporation. They're actually about things like how you get brownfield sites, how you get public sector land better used. There's talk of more enterprise zones, again, detail further needed. Employment and skills boards are probably going to be jointly shared with government. Quite how that works, I'm not sure. Certainly in the North East, and I'm less certain about Tees Valley, I realise I've forgotten about broadband, but broadband rollout will be a shared responsibility between government and certainly the North East. European funding, of course, notice Cornwall got responsibility for its 600 million euros of European spending by 2020. It got that devolved about 18 months ago. But there's going to be greater power over European funding. There's then going to be increased responsibility locally for rural growth and business support. In Tees Valley, there's a particular paragraph about culture and cultural investment, which I guess is going to be premises. Again, it doesn't say too much, but it's a very helpful indication that more needs to be done. And there are some very specific things for Tees Valley around energy and climate change support with industrial carbon capture and storage. So these are welcome, I think, welcome things. Health, NHS, the bill that I referred to, the Cities and Local Government Devolution Bill, is actually, the House of Lords amended it because of confusion about the powers of a combined authority over NHS decision-making, like how many hospital beds you've got. And the amendment basically said that the NHS as a national body should not have its NHS constitution messed with. And I was told, in other words, that the combined authorities would not, local government would not start making major decisions about health service investment, particularly between preventative care and acute care. Anyway, what has happened, I was told by Lord Warner, who led on this in the House of Lords. Lord Warner is the one about who last week resigned the Labour whip. But he told me and Joan Walmsley, who was our lead on health in the House of Lords, on Wednesday, that the government has accepted the principle that it's being rewritten. So there'll be a very clear definition in that bill in about 6 weeks' time, which defines exactly what the responsibilities local government can have in relation to health. But there's to be a commission in the North East combined authority area for health and social care integration. Some of you work in the area. It's terribly important that it actually produces real outcomes because when you're dealing with a person and that person is trying to leave hospital but needs care at home, actually ensuring that that works effectively and in the interest of the individual, that matters. So I don't quite know myself, I haven't read anything that tells me exactly what the Commission is going to do in the North East. So that's one to watch. There's going to be in the North East area, there's going to be a North East Planning Development Framework, which then says is not a regional spatial strategy. So I'm not absolutely clear myself, but you know, I'm going to look at the detail closely as to what these things actually mean. Of course, there'll be power on business rates to increase business rates if you have an elected mayor. So an elected mayor, both in Tees Valley and in the North East. And at the moment, up to 2% probably will be the figure that business rates could rise by. But equally, of course, there may be a move to reduce business rates. I'll come back to business rates. It's an important issue here in a moment. And then UKTI. I have long wanted UKTI to be more scrutinised about what it... I discovered about 3 years ago that UKTI had no regional targets in England. So it used to prior to 2010, but then it didn't. And it used to be able to report by region to say how much investment it had undertaken, achieved. It's now got a national target. And so making it, and it's much easier to deliver that, because if you can deliver it in London and the South East, then you achieve that. Anyway, there will be closer working and structural working with UKTI. Now look, for 10 minutes, I'm just going to talk about the issues that I now see. and this is what I hope that you will start to think about. It is stated that current councils and their powers will not be affected. You read that in all the documentation. Given that issues around land use, for example, are going to be pooled, because that's the reality if you have a land board or you have a development corporation. I think that's what it means. So you really have to pay very close attention to this as to what is then going to happen. Middlesbrough and North Tyneside, of course, have elected mayors. North Tyneside apparently considering having a referendum not to have an elected mayor. They maybe feel that there's a confusion between a North East mayor and a North Tyneside mayor. And ditto, I don't know about Middlesbrough, but anyway, there's a debate that will be had there. When the bill came through the House of Lords, and this is a general point I'm going to make now, we expressed serious concern about the creation of the one-party state. That is basically the Labour Party, which wins every election, often by under 50% of the vote, and then holds all places. And so every leader in the northeast of England is a Labour leader. And so they're in the same political party. That doesn't mean to say they're all friends and they're all going to work together. It does mean that they're in one political party. If you have an elected mayor, let's just suppose it wasn't the same political party. I tried with colleagues at committee stage in the House of Lords to have direct elections to combined authorities. We had no support from across the House other than our own benches. And we don't vote at committee stage in Lords. At the report stage, we didn't pursue that for want of that support. We pursued instead scrutiny and audit, and we got major changes to the structure of the scrutiny of elected mayors and the combined authorities. They're known as mayoral combined authorities. We got major changes in the bill to how that scrutiny would work, and also the creation of a separate audit function, which is looking at value for money. In other words, as you devolve responsibilities which involve public expenditure, so are the outcomes. It's a little bit like the work of the Audit Commission or the National Audit Office, but done at a very local, well, at a combined authority level. So you need to be very careful watching what they do, because the combined authorities will have, when the bill passes in the Commons in a few weeks' time, I think it will say that the structure of scrutiny and audit has to be agreed by the relevant combined authority, and the government and others, but they do actually have to agree. So attention needs to be paid there. But I'm very bothered by that one-party state. It was argued in the House of Lords that we don't want direct elections to a combined authority because it creates another layer of local government, and people won't stand for it. And I have to respond to people and say, look, the truth of the matter is, it is an extra layer of local. It is. That's what it is. If you have a combined authority, it is another layer. And there's no getting out of it. And it has to be accountable. And what you cannot have is what happened a few months ago at the North East Combined Authority, where there was a particularly tricky moment in what was a public meeting with the press present. And the Labour leaders all pack up and go down the corridor to sort it out, come back a few minutes later and announce what their decision is. So the public, in what is a supposedly open meeting, is not actually hearing what the discussion is about. Now, these are very serious matters, everybody, and you've got to keep your eye absolutely on it. Now, I have a concern about workload. So this elected mayor, I mean, Tees Valley, you'll have a view about workload, but just look at the North East. This person is going to be responsible, together with the 7 Labour leaders, each of whom will have a cabinet functional responsibility for 2 police authorities. So we have 2 full-time police and crime commissioners at the moment. Whatever you think about that, they are currently full-time. And so you know, two of those leaders are going to have to, besides being the council leader, are actually going to have to be in charge of the police and crime function as well. And then if you take all of the other functions that I've been describing, the workload is absolutely huge. The sums of money being allocated to each of the combined authorities, mayoral combined authorities by government for kind of administration costs are comparatively small. I think it's about £1 million or so. These are not big sums of money, and I start to worry about where the capacity for the support of all of what is going to happen actually is going to come from. I've talked about scrutiny and audit, I've talked about health. Can I move to business? I would just say I do think some of the contributions made by the Chamber of Commerce and others have been outstandingly good. And also the definitions, Ross, can I just say, particularly the work on the Northern Powerhouse too, and what was said about how the Chambers of Commerce can help deliver the Chancellor's aims, all our aims with the Northern Powerhouse. In the face, if you spotted it last week in the press, that by 2025, forecasts suggest that the South will grow twice as quickly in the next decade than the North. So there has to be, things have to happen actually to drive the growth of the North forward faster than it currently is, and the role of business is absolutely critical. I think, but I may be wrong, that the LEP, Local Enterprise Partnership, and its relations with the Combined Authority in Tees Valley are stronger and more central than they are in the North East. I stand to be corrected. I look at photographs in newspapers to tell me who's important and who isn't important. And if they're sitting in the middle of the photograph, it means that someone has decided. And so you will see Tees Valley LEP regularly kind of in the middle of photographs, whereas that is not the case so much in the North East.
Chair was next to Osborne, so...
Correct. The chair of Tees Valley LEP, you had it absolutely right, was sitting right next to George Osborne, and that was not happening in the North East. I, on Wednesday, had the Engineering Employers Federation for an hour over coffee in the House, where they went through their concerns about how business was going to be integrated with this new structure. Because, we worry, as opposition members, what is going to happen, and the openness of decision-making, but so do those who are not Lib Dems. They are just business genuinely concerned. And there was a very good piece in the Business Journal by the Engineering Employers Federation recently, just saying there has to be a clear structure for the integration of the Local Enterprise Partnership with the working of the Combined Authority. So, let's look at that. Business rates. George Osborne has announced the devolution of all business rates. I don't want to get into the detail of the history of business rates, national and local. I worry about equalisation for poor areas, strong, better off areas. Newcastle has a much higher business rate take than South Tyneside does, for example. I have come to the conclusion myself, and you should think about this, that all business rates should in future be pooled. Now, it could be future growth of business rates. There are ways of doing it, but I don't think any longer that you can have a combined authority, either Tees Valley or the North East, in which the finances have not been pooled more than they are now. Because when you pool finances, you also pool business risk. Will you pay attention to blue light services? A lot of talk at the moment about blue light services. There is a suggestion that the fire service should be merged with the ambulance service, and another suggestion that the fire service should be merged or put under the control of police and crime commissioners. And there are, in our own party, because I sat in a meeting on Thursday morning at the Local Government Association, where this was debated quite forcefully. And of course in France, sapeurs-pompiers, they have a joint fire ambulance service. And so just think about it, please, watch, because it's going to arise as an issue. Votes at 16, I should just mention that, with the Labour Party, we wrote into the bill that, because you understand the government doesn't have a majority in the House of Lords. No single party can on its own press votes through. It can't be done. So you have to forge alliances. We got an amendment through for vote at 16, working with Labour and with some crossbenchers. The Tories will, the Commons will remove it, and then we will go to ping pong with the House of Lords, and I don't quite know what's going to happen. But meanwhile, the House of Lords on the EU referendum bill, at which I have an involvement now, will be, I expect, doing exactly the same and moving in votes at 16 into the EU referendum bill, on the grounds that for young people aged 16, they have a right to a vote because it's their future. And of course, the evidence from Scotland, with the referendum there, where 16-year-olds were given the vote, is actually, it worked incredibly well. So I think now the world has moved on. There are suggestions that the government may start to shift on votes at 16, but at the moment there are no firm indications of that. We lost a vote, which we pressed by ourselves on the Shipley bill in July on introducing proportional representation across all local government elections. This matters. The reason is that it gets away from the one-party state, not quite at a stroke, not quite, but it would be a big, big help if you did. But we lost it, and the Labour Party would not support it. I find it very puzzling, given the situation in Scotland, where 56 of 59 MPs are SNP on half the vote. You would have thought they'd be more interested, right? And the last thing we tried to do was guarantee the rights, your rights, and the press's rights. We worked very closely with national press bodies on access to meetings. That is, ensuring that meetings are open to press and public, because the danger of a one-party state is that there will be a tendency to try to push stuff through without there being a proper debate or a proper scrutiny. So, you know, watch please plans for access to meetings and who can come in when. The last thing I just want to comment on is yesterday's German newspaper. I read the Northern Echo yesterday, but maybe I missed it, but MPs, Labour MPs, across the northeast combined authority area, very anti. Don't want an elected mayor. Ian Meehan's, the MP for Gateshead, on the subject of geography, how wrong it is to have a combined authority when the region is so big from the Scottish border down to Newton Aycliffe. Well, he's right in the sense it is very big, of course it is. But that's the local enterprise partnership. Boundaries, it is what the North East said it wanted. Tees Valley's boundaries are what Tees Valley, I think, said it wanted. One will have to watch that very carefully, but I hope that the Labour Party itself, given the drive we now have, which requires a lot of work to give to give flesh to the detail. What we don't want is the Labour Party having open warfare, and at the moment I'm seeing too many Labour MPs in the region who are indicating their opposition to what is happening. Your role and our role, my role, our role in the House. Your role is to read everything that is now out there in the public arena, and it is to scrutinise it and to watch it as it progresses. And I really think it really is very, very important that the party does that. I do not know whether we have structures within Tees Valley and within the North East which actually bring councillors and constituencies together to talk about some of these issues, because I think you're going to have to do so. And we don't want Northumberland and Durham sending different messages from Newcastle, North Tyneside. So it's just important that there are forums where people are talking, and they can be electronic. But somehow there has to be a structure at which you're addressing these issues. And our role is that for each of the combined authorities that is established, it has to go through what is termed the affirmative procedure in both houses. This means that I, Diana, colleagues, Ian, get the opportunity to talk about the precise devolution deal that has been signed and how then it is going to be structured. So a lot more detail, which defines powers of Secretary of State, for example, defines the powers of councils to discuss things the combined authority are doing and so on. All of that will be defined, and we're able to talk about that, and then we have to vote on it. Now, as Sal said earlier, it is incredibly rare for an affirmative resolution to be turned down, but it can be done. The creation of the combined authorities in the North East, for example, came through the House of Lords, I was thinking it was 2 years ago now, and you'll find on Hansard what we said at the time. So we are, we should be proud as a party of what we have achieved so far. But now starts the hard bit. So getting over that hurdle of understanding that we want to devolve power, that it's in everybody's interest in the country that should happen. But the hard part starts because actually the region as a whole has to move on from demanding the powers to making those powers work. And it's now become a question of delivering on our responsibilities. Our role as a political party is to challenge and to scrutinise and to audit what the Labour Party is doing. Ian.
Thank you, John.